The class loser of the class was invited to the 10-year reunion. She came by helicopter with Mafia boss. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped between bills and grocery store flyers like it belonged there. Maya Chun stared at the elegant cream envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced the embossed letters. Jefferson High School, class of 2015, 10-year reunion. For a long moment, she simply stood in the doorway of the penthouse, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind her like a crown of diamonds she never asked to wear. 10 years. Had it really been a decade since she walked those halls with her head down, books clutched to her chest like armor that never quite protected her? Since she heard the whispers that followed her like shadows, freak, loser, invisible girl. The memories rushed back uninvited, sharp as broken glass. The laughter that echoed in empty hallways. The cruel notes shoved into her locker. The way people looked through her as if she were made of smoke. Maya set the invitation on the marble counter and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below her, New York City pulsed with life, millions of people with millions of stories, none of them knowing that the woman in the sky-high penthouse used to cry herself to sleep in a cramped bedroom in Ohio. None of them knowing that the elegant creature reflected in the glass was once a girl who ate lunch alone in bathroom stalls because the cafeteria felt like a war zone. "You're thinking too loud again." The voice came from behind her, deep and smooth as aged whiskey. Maya didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She knew exactly who stood in the doorway, could feel his presence like a shift in atmospheric pressure. Dominic Marchetti had that effect on everyone, but especially on her. "I received something interesting in the mail," she said quietly. She heard his footsteps approach, measured and unhurried. Everything about Dominic was controlled, deliberate. He moved through the world like a man who had never once been afraid of it, because the world had learned long ago to be afraid of him instead. When he reached her side, he plucked the invitation from her fingers with casual possession. His dark eyes scanned the paper and something flickered in their depths. Something that might have been amusement on anyone else, but on Dominic Marchetti looked more like the careful calculation of a predator assessing new territory. "A reunion," he murmured. "How? Nostalgic." Maya finally turned to look at him. Even after 3 years, the sight of him still did something complicated to her chest. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are, dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on. Renaissance paintings of fallen angels, a jaw shadowed with perpetual stubble, and eyes so black they seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Today, he wore a charcoal suit that cost more than her parents' house, the jacket open to reveal a crisp white shirt beneath. A silver watch gleamed at his wrist, a gift from someone whose name was now whispered in fear across 3 continents. "I don't know if I should go," Maya admitted. Dominic's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're afraid." "No. Yes. I just don't see the point of revisiting the past. The point, to Sorrow, is that they don't know who you've become." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with surprising gentleness. His fingers lingered on her jaw. "They remember the girl who disappeared without a trace. The girl they tormented without consequence. Don't you want them to see what became of her?" Maya held his gaze. Behind those dark eyes lay the mind of a man who had built an empire from nothing, who controlled half the eastern seaboard's underground operations with nothing more than whispered commands and absolute loyalty, from men who would die before betraying him. Dominic Marchetti was the name that made politicians sweat and rival families pray. He was wanted by agencies that didn't officially exist, protected by lawyers who bent laws like rubber bands, and loved, truly, impossibly loved, by a girl who once couldn't even look people in the eyes. "What if they don't see a transformation?" she whispered. "What if they just see a girl playing dress-up in a life she doesn't deserve?" Something dangerous flashed in Dominic's expression. He cupped her face in both hands, tilting it up, until she had no choice but to see herself reflected in his gaze. Listen to me carefully, Maya-chan. You are not playing at anything. You survived them. You survived worse than them. And you survived me, which is more than most can claim. His thumb traced her cheekbone. If you want to go to this reunion, we will go. And they will see exactly what happens when you underestimate someone. They will see you walk in like a queen, because that is precisely what you are. And they will know that the girl they tried to destroy became the woman who captured the heart of the most feared man in the country. Maya's breath caught. Dominic, I don't want them to be afraid of me because of you. Then they will be afraid of you because of you. Because you're stronger than any of them ever were. Because you looked into the darkness and didn't blink. His voice dropped lower. Because you made me love you, and that took more courage than anything they could comprehend. She stared at him for a long moment. This man who had shown her both the brightest lights and the deepest shadows of human nature. This man who had enemies in every corner of the globe and yet looked at her like she was the only thing that truly mattered. Okay, she said finally, let's show them. The smile that crossed Dominic's face was almost gentle. Almost. Beneath it lay something else, the satisfaction of a man who had just been given permission to unleash exactly the kind of chaos he enjoyed most. I'll have the helicopter prepared. Maya blinked. The helicopter? Dominic, it's in Ohio. Yes, he agreed, as if this were perfectly reasonable. And we will arrive in style. He was already pulling out his phone, typing rapidly. I'll also arrange for appropriate security. Your former classmates may have misjudged you, but I will not have anyone misjudge my intentions toward protecting what's mine. Dominic, you can't just bring your people to a high school reunion. He looked up from his phone with genuine confusion. Why not? Because normal people don't travel with armed security. I am not normal people, Tesoro, and neither anymore are you. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Trust me, by the end of this evening, every person who ever made you feel small will understand exactly how wrong they were, and they will remember this night for the rest of their lives. Maya watched him walk away, already barking orders into his phone in rapid Italian. Despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty and the voice in her head that still whispered she wasn't worthy of any of this, she felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Anticipation. The reunion was in 3 days. For the first time in her life, Maya Chun was looking forward to facing her past. She just didn't know that her past was already making plans of its own. The Grand Marquis Hotel in Columbus, Ohio, had been transformed for the reunion. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in the school colors, blue and gold, and a banner proclaimed, "Welcome back, class of 2015," in cheerful letters that felt almost mocking in their enthusiasm. Former cheerleaders clustered near the bar in designer dresses. Former jocks laughed too loudly about glory days that peaked at 18. And everyone pretended they weren't desperately comparing their lives to everyone else's. Jessica Palmer stood at the center of it all, exactly where she'd always stood. 10 years had added subtle lines around her eyes and a certain hardness to her smile, but she was still beautiful in that sharp, calculated way that made other women feel inadequate. She'd married Chad Thornton, starting quarterback, homecoming king, walking cliché, and together they ruled this reunion like they'd once ruled the school. Has anyone seen Maya Chun's RSVP? Someone asked, flipping through the check-in list. Jessica laughed, the sound bright and brittle. Maya Chun? Please. She's probably still living in her parents' basement, afraid to show her face. She sipped her champagne. Remember how she used to scurry through the halls like a scared little mouse? Pathetic. I heard she just vanished after graduation, Chad offered. Like, nobody knows what happened to her. Probably for the best, Jessica said. Some people aren't meant for anything more than being invisible. The other former popular kids laughed, and the conversation moved on to more interesting topics: promotions, second homes, whose marriage was secretly falling apart. Nobody noticed the subtle shift in the air, the way the hotel staff suddenly seemed more alert, more watchful. Nobody noticed the three men in dark suits who had quietly positioned themselves near the exits, their eyes scanning the room with professional intensity. Nobody noticed anything at all until they heard it. The sound started as a distant thrum, barely audible over the music and chatter. But it grew louder, closer, until even Jessica stopped mid-sentence to frown at the ceiling. The chandeliers trembled slightly, glasses rattled on tables. And then someone near the window gasped, "What the hell is that?" The entire room turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the hotel's courtyard. What they saw made conversations die mid-word and champagne glasses freeze halfway to lips. A helicopter, sleek, black, and unmistakably expensive, was descending toward the hotel's private landing pad. It moved with the kind of precision that spoke of military-grade piloting, lights cutting through the evening darkness like the eyes of some massive predatory bird. On its side, barely visible but somehow unmistakable, was a symbol that made the older staff members go pale. The Marchetti crest. Who? Jessica breathed. Who would? The helicopter touched down with barely a whisper of contact. For a moment, nothing happened. The rotors slowed, the lights dimmed, and then the door opened. The first to emerge were two men in suits that probably cost more than Jessica's car. They moved with the kind of fluid alertness that screamed professional security, not rent-a-cops, but the real thing. The kind of men who had seen combat, who had ended threats without hesitation, who answered to someone powerful enough to command such loyalty. They flanked the helicopter door and waited. And then she stepped out. Later, the witnesses would struggle to describe the moment. It wasn't just that Maya Chun had changed, though she had dramatically. It was the way she moved, the way she held herself, the way the very air seemed to part for her like she had earned its respect. Her dark hair, once mousy and perpetually hiding her face, now fell in elegant waves past her shoulders. Her body, once hunched in defensive posture, now stood tall in a dress that seemed to be made of liquid silver designer. Obviously, probably custom, the kind of thing you saw on red carpets and magazine covers. But it was her face that truly shocked them. Gone was the uncertain girl who couldn't meet anyone's eyes. In her place stood a woman who looked at the world like she owned it, and found it mildly disappointing. Her makeup was flawless, her expression serene, and something in her gaze suggested she had seen things that would break the minds of everyone watching. She wasn't alone. The man who emerged behind her made even the security team look like children playing dress-up. Tall, dark, devastatingly handsome in a way that felt almost unfair, he moved with the controlled grace of a predator who had never once been prey. His suit was black as midnight, perfectly tailored, and even from this distance, everyone could see the way his eyes swept the room with cold assessment. His hand rested on Maya's lower back with casual possession, not guiding her, but claiming her, marking her as his in front of every single person who had ever made her feel worthless. "Holy shit," Chad whispered. Is that who I think it is?" Jessica's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. She didn't even notice. Her face had gone to chalk white, and her perfectly manicured hands were trembling. Because everyone in that room who had ever watched the news, who had ever heard whispered rumors about the shadows that controlled America's underworld, recognized that face. Dominic Marchetti, the ghost. The name that made federal agents curse and rival organizations pray for mercy. And he was looking at Maya Chun like she was the only person in the entire universe who mattered. The glass doors opened and Maya walked in. She paused at the entrance, her silver dress catching the chandelier light and scattering it like diamonds. Behind her, Dominic stood like a monument to everything dangerous and beautiful about the world. Their security team had faded into the background, professional and invisible, but everyone knew they were there. Everyone knew what their presence meant. Maya's eyes found Jessica across the room, and she smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It wasn't triumphant or vindictive or any of the things Jessica deserved to see. It was simply serene. The smile of someone who had climbed so far beyond petty high school drama that it no longer even registered as significant. "Jessica," Maya said, her voice carrying easily across the silent room. "You look exactly the same." It wasn't a compliment, and everyone knew it. Jessica opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in her life, she was completely, utterly speechless. The girl she had tormented, the girl she had called worthless and pathetic and destined for nothing, that girl had just arrived on the arm of the most powerful and dangerous man in the country. And she was looking at Jessica like she was nothing more than an old photograph, faded, irrelevant, a relic of a time that no longer mattered. Maya. Chad stepped forward, attempting to salvage something from the wreckage of everyone's expectations. "Wow, you look amazing. We had no idea you were successful," Maya offered. "Happy?" She glanced up at Dominic, and something genuine softened her expression. "I am, actually. Both of those things." Dominic's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her waist. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried through the room like thunder. "These are the people who hurt you." It wasn't a question. It was an observation. And somehow, that made it worse. Every single person who had ever laughed at Maya, ignored her, made her feel less than human, felt that cold gaze pass over them like judgment, like he was memorizing faces, making lists. "They're irrelevant now," Maya said quietly. "That's what I wanted you to see." Dominic studied her for a moment, and something that might have been respect flickered in his dark eyes. "As you wish, Tesoro." He turned to the room at large, and his smile was the kind that made men sign over their fortunes and women forget their own names. "Please, continue your celebration. We're simply here to reminisce." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Amaya Shun, the outcast, the loser, the girl who ate lunch in bathroom stalls and cried herself to sleep for 4 years of high school. She walked through her former tormentors like a queen through peasants, her hand in the hand of the most feared man in America. The night had only just begun. The reunion continued in a state of controlled chaos. People clustered in small groups, whispers flying like startled birds. All eyes continuously drawn to the corner table where Maya and Dominic sat like royalty holding court. The security team remained invisible but present, a constant reminder that this wasn't just any wealthy couple. Jessica had retreated to the bathroom to compose herself, but her hands still shook when she reapplied her lipstick. Chad hovered near the bar, downing whiskey faster than was wise, and trying to process what he'd just witnessed. The other former popular kids had scattered to their respective tables, all pretending to have normal conversations while stealing glances at the impossible scene across the room. Maya found herself surprisingly calm. She had expected to feel vindicated, perhaps even a little cruel in her triumph. Instead, she felt empty. Not unhappy, just hollow, like she'd been carrying around a heavy stone for 10 years. And now that she'd finally set it down, she wasn't sure what to do with her empty hands. "You're overthinking again," Dominic murmured, not looking up from his phone. Even at a high school reunion, he was managing an empire. "I can practically hear the gears turning in your head." "I thought I would feel different," she admitted. "More satisfied. Revenge is rarely as sweet as anticipation suggests." He finally pocketed his phone and turned his full attention to her. In the warm light of the chandeliers, his dark eyes seemed almost gentle. The problem with using others' opinions as your measure of worth is that their approval tastes just as hollow as their rejection once felt painful. Maya studied him, this man who had built empires on fear and respect, who had enemies in every country and allies in fewer. When did you become so philosophical? I've had time to reflect on the nature of power. His lips curved, usually while waiting for various bureaucrats to stop being obstacles. Before Maya could respond, someone approached their table. Not Jessica. She was still hiding in the bathroom, but someone almost worse. Derek Kim, the class valedictorian, the golden boy who had been too smart to openly bully Maya but had never once defended her either. He wore success like a second skin, expensive suit, confident posture, the kind of smile that closed business deals and broke hearts. Maya Chun, he said, as if tasting the name. I almost didn't recognize you. Derek, she kept her voice neutral. Still practicing your entrance speeches, I see. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, at being read so easily. I deserved that. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For high school. For not being better. Maya tilted her head, considering him. Of all the people who had made her life miserable, Derek had been the most insidious, not through active cruelty, but through deliberate indifference. He'd watched others tear her down and done nothing, choosing his own social standing over basic human decency. Thank you, she said finally. That actually means something. Coming from you. Derek's eyes slid to Dominic, who had been watching the exchange with the patient stillness of a predator deciding whether to strike. And you must be Dominic Marquette. He didn't offer his hand. I know who you are, Mr. Kim. Your hedge fund has made some interesting moves in the Southeast Asian markets lately. Derek went slightly pale. You follow financial news? I follow everything that might one day be relevant to my interests. Dominic's smile didn't reach his eyes. Your fund is not currently relevant. I suggest you keep it that way. It was a dismissal, clear and brutal. Derek muttered something about getting another drink and practically fled. Maya watched him go with something between amusement and exasperation. You didn't have to terrify him. I didn't terrify him, I informed him. Dominic took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. There's a difference, is there? Terror would have involved mentioning the discrepancies in his quarterly reports. I was being merciful. Maya couldn't help the laugh that escaped her. This man, this impossible, dangerous, beautiful man, could make her laugh even in the middle of confronting her worst memories. It was one of the things she loved most about him, and one of the things that scared her most. Tell me something, she said quietly. That night we met, did you know who I was? What my past was like? Dominic was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. I knew you were alone in a city that devours lonely people. I knew you were strong enough to survive it anyway. I knew that when you looked at me, you didn't see the title or the power or the fear. You saw me. His grip on her hand tightened. That was enough. And now that you know everything, now I understand why you looked at the world like it had already done its worst. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. And I am grateful that it failed to break you. Because you are meant to be so much more than what they tried to make you. The moment was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. Jessica had finally emerged from the bathroom, and she was not alone. Chad stood beside her, along with several other members of their old circle, a united front of faded glory, liquid courage, and wounded pride. Maya. Jessica's voice carried across the room, sharp and too loud. We need to talk. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle tension, like a coiled spring. Maya placed a hand on his arm. Let me handle this. He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. I'll be right here. Maya rose from her chair and walked toward her former tormentor. Every step felt like shedding old skin, like leaving behind the girl who used to flinch at Jessica's approach. By the time she reached the group, she felt almost light. "Jessica, you wanted to talk?" "Yes, I wanted to talk." Jessica's eyes darted to Dominic, then back to Maya. "I wanted to understand how the girl who used to hide in bathroom stalls ended up with someone who loves me?" Maya suggested. "Is that really so hard to believe?" "He's a criminal." The words burst out of Jessica before she could stop them. "Everyone knows what he is, what he does. You can't seriously expect us to believe. I don't expect anything from you, Jessica. I never did." Maya's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You spent 4 years trying to make me feel worthless, invisible, less than human. And then I left, and I built a life you can't even comprehend. And I found someone who sees all of me. The scared girl I was, the woman I became, and loves both equally." Jessica's face was mottled red with emotion. "He's dangerous. So am I." Maya smiled, and there was something ancient in her eyes, something forged in fires that Jessica couldn't imagine. "That's what happens when you survived the things I've survived. You either break, or you become something stronger. I chose not to break." Silence stretched between them. Behind Maya, she could feel Dominic's gaze on her back, not protective, not possessive, just present, supporting her without overshadowing her. "This isn't over," Jessica hissed. "Actually, it is." Maya's smile didn't waver. "That's what I came here to understand. You have no power over me anymore. None of you do. And whatever you think you know about my life, about Dominic, about who I've become, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of this night, you'll go back to your ordinary lives and your ordinary problems. And I'll go home with the man I love. And tomorrow, you'll still be trying to relive your glory days, and I'll be living a life you couldn't even dream of." She turned to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and Jessica? The next time you want to gossip about my husband, maybe consider that he has very good hearing." She glanced back over her shoulder with something that was almost pity, and a very long memory. The color drained from Jessica's face as the implications sank in. Husband. Maya hadn't worn a ring tonight. A deliberate choice, but the word hung in the air like a verdict. Maya returned to Dominic's side, sliding back into her chair with grace that felt natural now. He watched her with something that might have been admiration. "Husband," he murmured, a strategic exaggeration. She met his eyes. "Unless you have objections." His smile was slow and devastating. "None whatsoever, Mrs. Marchetti." The name sent an unexpected thrill through her. And for the first time, Maya allowed herself to consider a future she'd never dared to imagine. Not as the outcast, not as the survivor, but as something entirely new. But across the room, a man in a server's uniform was watching her with unusual intensity. His name tag read Thomas, but the calluses on his hands and the cold assessment in his eyes suggested he was anything but staff. He raised his phone, snapped a photo of Maya and Dominic together, and sent it with a single message. "Target confirmed. The ghost has a weakness." In the shadows of the criminal underworld, certain names inspired terror. Dominic Marchetti was chief among them. For years, rival organizations had searched for a vulnerability, something, anything that could be used against the untouchable king of the eastern seaboard. Tonight, they had finally found it. And Maya Shun, the girl who had survived high school, survived loneliness, survived the judgment of an entire world, was about to face the deadliest test of her life. The reunion was ending. Her real trial was just beginning. The penthouse felt different when they returned to New York. The glittering skyline that had once seemed like a symbol of Maya's transformation now looked more like a cage made of light, beautiful, but still a cage. She stood at the windows while Dominic made phone calls in rapid Italian, his voice sharp with an edge she rarely heard directed at anyone but enemies. Something had shifted at the reunion. Not just the confrontation with Jessica, not just the petty triumph of showing her former bullies how wrong they had been. Something darker had stirred in the shadows, and Maya could feel it like a change in air pressure before a storm. "We need to talk," Dominic said, ending his final call. Maya turned to face him. In the 3 years since they had met, since that rainy night when she had stumbled into a restaurant she couldn't afford and found herself seated across from the most dangerous man she would ever know, she had learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression. Right now his face was carved from stone, but his eyes burned with something that might have been fear. Dominic Marchetti did not feel fear. Not for himself. "What's wrong?" she asked. He crossed to her in 3 swift strides, taking her hands in his. His grip was almost too tight, like he was afraid she might dissolve if he let go. "The Koslov family has been watching us. They've been watching you." His jaw tightened. They had someone at the reunion, a photographer posing as staff. "They know who you are now, what you mean to me." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. She knew the name Kozlov. Everyone in Dominic's world did. Viktor Kozlov was the head of the Russian syndicate that had been encroaching on Marchetti territory for years. The rivalry between the two families was legendary, built on decades of blood and betrayal. Victor's father had been eliminated by Dominic's father 30 years ago, and Victor had spent his entire life waiting for revenge. "How much do they know?" she whispered. "Everything." Dominic's voice was raw. "Your name, your history, where you grew up. They know about your parents in Ohio. They know about your sister in Chicago." His hands tightened on hers. "They know that you are the only thing in this world I cannot lose." The weight of his words pressed down on her like a physical force. For 3 years, Dominic had kept her existence carefully hidden from his enemies. She lived in his world, but existed just outside it, protected by anonymity and deliberate obscurity. The reunion had changed that. Her own desire for closure, for confrontation with her past, had exposed her to a danger far greater than high school bullies. "What do we do?" she asked. "We disappear. Tonight. I have properties no one knows about, places where even Kozlov's reach cannot extend. We leave, and we don't come back until this is handled. And my family?" "Already being moved. My people are with them now." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I will protect them, Maya. I will protect everyone you love. But I need you to trust me." She did trust him. That was the terrifying part. She trusted him with her life, with her heart, with everything she had. But trust didn't stop the fear that coiled in her stomach like a living thing. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "I wanted to go to that reunion. I wanted to prove something to people who don't even matter. And now, no." His voice was fierce. "This is Kozlov's fault. This is the fault of men who think they can use innocent people as weapons. You wanted to face your past. That's courage, not weakness. Never apologize for being brave." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something in his expression shifted. A crack in the stone, a flash of something almost vulnerable. "What is it?" "Kozlov wants to meet. Tonight. Neutral ground." He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw genuine uncertainty in his eyes. "He says he has something I want, and that I should come alone, or he'll start making examples of everyone I've ever cared about." Maya's heart stopped. "You can't go alone. That's exactly what he wants." "I know." Dominic pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "But I also can't let him hurt you. Can't let him hurt your family. If there's even a chance I can end this without more bloodshed. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap." His smile was bitter. "But I've walked into traps before, Tessero. I've always walked out. This is different." Maya gripped his jacket, her fingers digging into the expensive fabric. "This isn't about territory or money. This is personal. Viktor Kozlov wants to destroy you, and he'll use me to do it. Then I won't give him the chance. Dominic kissed her forehead, gentle and fierce all at once. I have to go. But I need you to do something for me. Anything. Stay here. Stay with Marco and the security team. Don't leave this penthouse for any reason, no matter what you hear. He pulled back to look at her. Can you do that for me? Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to demand that she come with him, to fight alongside the man she loved instead of hiding like the scared girl she used to be. But she saw the fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. And she understood that her safety was the only leverage Kozlov had. I'll stay, she promised. But Dominic, come back to me. Whatever it takes, whatever you have to do, come back. He kissed her then, deep and desperate, like a man going to war who wasn't sure he'd survive it. When he pulled away, his eyes were bright with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. I love you, Maya-chun. I should have said it more often. I should have said it every day. You can tell me when you get back, she said, her voice breaking. You can tell me every day for the rest of our lives. He smiled, a real smile, soft and human and heartbreaking. I intend to. And then he was gone, disappearing into the elevator with two of his most trusted men, leaving Maya alone in a penthouse that had never felt so empty. The hours that followed were the longest of her life. She paced the floors like a caged animal, checking her phone every 30 seconds, jumping at every sound. Marco, the head of her security detail, tried to reassure her, but his own tension was palpable. They all knew what was at stake. At midnight, her phone rang. Unknown number. Maya's hands shook as she answered. Hello? Mrs. Marchetti? The voice was cold, accented, unmistakably Russian. Your husband has proven to be quite stubborn. He refuses to cooperate with my very reasonable requests. Kozlov. She forced steel into her voice. Whatever you're planning, it won't work. Dominic will never. Dominic is currently my guest, Victor interrupted smoothly, along with the two men who accompanied him. They're alive, for now. But that situation can change very quickly. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. You're lying. Am I? There was a shuffle, and then another voice, distant, pained, but unmistakable. Maya, don't listen to him. Stay where you are. Don't. The voice cut off with a sharp sound that made her stomach turn. As you can see, Victor continued, I'm quite serious. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to come to me alone. And in exchange, I'll let your beloved husband live long enough to watch what happens next. Why? Maya's voice was barely a whisper. What do you want from me? Want Dominic Marchetti to suffer the way my father suffered? To lose everything he loves piece by piece while he watches helplessly. Victor's voice hardened. You have 1 hour. I'll send the address. Come alone or everyone dies. The line went dead. Maya stood frozen, the phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Around her, Marco and the security team were already moving, speaking rapidly into their radios, trying to trace the call. But she knew it wouldn't matter. Victor Kozlov hadn't survived this long by being careless. Mrs. Chun, Marco said urgently. Mr. Marchetti's orders were clear. You cannot leave this building. Mr. Marchetti is being held by a man who wants to torture him to death. Maya's voice was steadier than she felt. His orders no longer apply. With respect, ma'am, Marco. She turned to face him, and something in her expression made him take a step back. I spent 23 years being afraid. Afraid of bullies, afraid of being seen, afraid of wanting more than survival. Then I met a man who saw me, really saw me, and for the first time in my life, I stopped being afraid. She straightened her spine, feeling the transformations settle into her bones. I'm not going to hide while the man I love is in danger. I'm not going to let fear make my choices for me. Not anymore. Then let us come with you. Let us, if Kozlov sees anyone but me, Dominic dies. Maya was already moving toward the elevator. I know this is a trap. I know I'm probably walking to my death. But if there's even a chance I can save him, I have to try. Marco stepped in front of her, his expression torn. Mr. Marchetti would never forgive me if I let you go. Then don't let me. Maya met his eyes. Help me save him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, Marco reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, barely larger than a button. Tracker, he said quietly. Swallow it. We'll be able to find you within a 10-mile radius. It's not much, but... Maya took the device without hesitation. It's enough. She swallowed it with a grimace, then straightened her shoulders. The address had arrived on her phone, a warehouse in the industrial district, because of course it was a warehouse. These things always happened in warehouses. Give me 30 minutes before you follow, she said. I need time to find Dominic to figure out what we're dealing with. 20, Marco countered. That's as long as I can wait without losing my mind. Despite everything, Maya smiled. 20 minutes. And Marco? Thank you. The elevator doors closed on his worried face, and Maya descended toward whatever fate awaited her. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but her hands were steady. She was done being the victim of other people's cruelty. Tonight, she would write her own ending. So the warehouse loomed against the night sky like a monument to every nightmare she'd ever had. Maya stepped out of the taxi. She'd insisted on no drivers, no obvious connections to the Marchetti organization, and walked toward the single-lit entrance. Her heels clicked against concrete like a countdown. Victor Kozlov was waiting for her inside, flanked by men who made Dominic's security team look like amateurs. He was older than she expected, silver-haired and distinguished, with the kind of face that belonged at diplomatic functions rather than criminal enterprises. But his eyes were cold as Arctic ice, and when he smiled, she saw the predator beneath the Polish. Mrs. Marchetti, he said, spreading his arms in mock welcome. How brave of you to come. Where is he? Direct. I appreciate that. Victor gestured, and two of his men dragged Dominic forward. Maya's heart clenched. He was alive but barely standing. His suit was torn, his face bruised, his wrists bound behind his back, but when his eyes found hers, they blazed with fury rather than defeat. Maya, no. His voice was hoarse. What are you doing here? I told you to stay. I know what you told me. She held his gaze, pouring every ounce of love and determination into her expression. I chose not to listen. Victor laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse walls. Magnificent. Truly. I can see why he's so obsessed with you. He circled Maya slowly, studying her like an interesting specimen. The question is, what do I do with you now that I have you both? You could let us go, Maya suggested. Walk away from this feud before it destroys you. Destroys me? Victor's amusement vanished. Your husband's father murdered mine, slaughtered him like an animal and left his body for us to find. For 30 years, I've waited for justice. And now... He reached out, touching her cheek with cold fingers. Now, I finally have everything I need. Dominic lunged forward, but the guards held him back. Don't touch her. If you harm a single hair on her head, I swear to God, you'll what? Victor turned to face him. You're in no position to make threats, Marchetti. You came here thinking you could negotiate, thinking your reputation would protect you. But reputation means nothing when you're on your knees. Maya watched the exchange, her mind racing. 20 minutes. She had 20 minutes before Marco and the team arrived. 20 minutes to figure out how to survive this, how to save Dominic, how to end this nightmare. And then she saw it. The recorder. Victor had one, clipped to his belt, probably for documenting his triumph, for creating evidence of the great Dominic Marchetti's downfall. And in his arrogance and his absolute certainty of victory, he hadn't considered that it might be used against him. Maya had grown up invisible. She had learned to watch, to listen, to notice things that others overlooked. And right now, she noticed that Victor Kozlov was so focused on Dominic that he had forgotten she was anything more than a prop in his revenge fantasy. Time to remind him, you want justice? Maya's voice cut through the warehouse, sharp and clear. Then, let's talk about justice. Victor turned to her, one eyebrow raised. The mouse speaks. The mouse survived. Maya stepped forward, her chin lifted. The mouse learned that the only way to deal with predators is to stop running and start fighting. So here I am, Victor. Fighting. Fighting with what? You have no weapons, no allies, no leverage. You're nothing but a bargaining chip. Am I? Maya smiled, and she saw something flicker in Victor's expression, the first hint of uncertainty. Let me tell you something about being underestimated. You spend your whole life watching people dismiss you, overlook you, assume you're harmless, and the whole time you're learning, observing, planning. She took another step forward, holding Victor's gaze like it was a lifeline. Behind him, she could see Dominic watching her with a mixture of terror and awe. The guards had relaxed slightly, amused by what they saw as a desperate woman's last stand. Good. Let them underestimate her one more time. Your father's death, Maya continued. You've spent 30 years blaming the Marchetti family, but have you ever wondered why it happened? Have you ever asked what led to that night? Victor's face hardened. I know exactly what happened. Enzo Marchetti was a butcher who eliminated anyone who stood in his way. That's the story you were told. Maya's voice was soft, almost gentle. But stories can be wrong, especially when they're told by people with their own agendas. What are you implying? Maya glanced at Dominic, and something passed between them. A question, a permission, a shared understanding. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. I'm implying that your father wasn't eliminated by Enzo Marchetti, Maya said. He was eliminated by your own uncle, the man who took over your family's operations after your father died, the man who raised you on hatred and pointed you at the Marchettis like a weapon. Victor went still. The warehouse seemed to hold its breath. You're lying. Am I? Check the dates, Victor. Check who benefited most from your father's death. Your uncle took control of everything, the territories, the connections, the loyalty, and he needed someone to blame, someone to direct your grief toward. So he created a narrative, and you believed it because you were a child who had just lost his father. This is manipulation. But there was something in Victor's voice now, a crack in his certainty. You're trying to confuse me. I'm trying to show you the truth. Maya risked another step forward. Dominic has files, evidence that his father gathered before he died. He never used it because he believed in certain codes, certain rules about how business should be conducted. But I have no such limitations. She was close enough now to see the recorder on Victor's belt, close enough to reach it if she moved fast. Your uncle is still alive, she continued, still pulling strings from his retirement in Cyprus, still profiting from the war he started between our families. If you want justice, real justice, then maybe you should be asking him questions instead of torturing the wrong man. Victor's face was a war of emotions, doubt, anger, fear, calculation. Behind him, the guards were exchanging uncertain glances. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. The victim wasn't supposed to fight back with words sharper than any weapon. Even if what you're saying is true, Victor said slowly, it changes nothing. Dominic Marchetti has been my enemy for decades. His family has taken from mine, again and again, and your family has taken from his. That's how these things work, isn't it? An endless cycle of revenge, each generation inheriting the hatred of the last. Maya's voice softened, but it doesn't have to be this way. You could walk away. You could take the information I'm offering and use it to finally get real answers. You could choose to be more than what your uncle made you. For a long, suspended moment, Victor seemed to waver. Maya could see him calculating, weighing options, considering possibilities he had never allowed himself to imagine. And then his face hardened. "A pretty speech," he said. "But speeches don't bring back the dead, and they don't satisfy 30 years of waiting." He turned to his men. "We're done here. Prepare them both for transport. Tonight, the Marchetti line ends." Maya moved. Everything she had learned in 3 years of living with the most dangerous man in America had taught her one crucial lesson. When you have nothing left to lose, you become the most dangerous person in the room. Her hand shot out, grabbing the recorder from Victor's belt. In the same motion, she twisted away from the guard who reached for her, using his own momentum to send him stumbling into his partner. 3 years of self-defense training with Dominic's best instructors paid off in that single, fluid movement. "Nobody move," she shouted, holding up the recorder. "This has been broadcasting to an external server since the moment I walked in. Everything Victor just said, his plans, his confessions, his admission of holding Dominic hostage, is already in the hands of people who will know exactly what to do with it." Victor's face went white. "That's impossible." "We swept you for devices. You swept for electronics." Maya's smile was sharp as broken glass. "You didn't think to check for biological solutions." "There's a tracker in my stomach, Victor. My people have been listening to everything, and they've been moving into position since I arrived." As if on cue, the warehouse doors exploded inward. Men in tactical gear poured through, moving with the precision of a military operation. But they weren't military. They were Marchetti's elite, the ones who handled situations too delicate for regular security. Victor's men scrambled for weapons, but they were outmatched and they knew it. Within seconds, the warehouse was secured, and Victor Kozlov found himself staring down the barrels of a dozen weapons. "It's over," Maya said quietly. "All of this, the feud, the revenge, the endless cycle of violence, it ends tonight." Victor looked at her with something that might have been respect. "You played me. I survived you. There's a difference." Dominic was freed from his bonds, crossing immediately to Maya's side. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close with desperate relief. "You impossible woman," he breathed into her hair. "You absolute madwoman. I told you to stay safe. Safety is overrated." Maya pulled back to look at his face, bruised, exhausted, but alive. Alive. Besides, someone once told me that I was stronger than anyone gave me credit for. I figured it was time to prove him right. Dominic laughed, actually laughed, the sound rough and broken, but genuine. "I love you. I love you more than I have ever loved anything in my miserable life." "I know." Maya touched his face gently. "Now, let's go home." But first, she turned to Victor, who was being held by 2 of Marchetti's men. The Russian's face was unreadable, but something in his eyes had changed. The fanatical certainty was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like exhaustion. "The information about your uncle is real," she said. "Dominic will give you the files. What you do with them is your choice. But I want you to understand something." She stepped closer, holding his gaze. "This could have gone differently. We could have ended up enemies forever, destroying each other piece by piece until there was nothing left. Instead, we have a chance to stop, to choose something other than hatred." "Why?" Victor asked. "Why would you offer me anything after what I almost did?" "Because I know what it's like to carry anger for years." Maya's voice was soft. "I know what it's like to let old wounds define your entire existence, and I know that it's possible to let go, to choose a different path." She stepped back. "The choice is yours, Victor. But know this, if you ever threaten my family again, I won't be so merciful." Something shifted in Victor's expression, not softening exactly, but settling, like a man who had finally set down a weight he'd been carrying for too long. "You have my word," he said finally. The war is over. Dominic stepped forward, and for a long moment, the two men simply looked at each other. Decades of hatred, of violence, of loss, all condensed into this single moment of reckoning. "Release him," Dominic said finally. His men obeyed, stepping back from Victor with obvious reluctance. The Russian straightened his jacket, his dignity battered but intact. "The files," Victor said. "You'll send them?" "Tonight." Dominic extended his hand, not in friendship, but in acknowledgement. "This ends here, Kozlov. Whatever our fathers started, we finish. No more revenge. No more war." Victor hesitated for a long moment. Then, slowly, he took Dominic's hand. "No more war," he agreed. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. But it was something, a beginning perhaps, or at least an ending. The ending of a conflict that had consumed both their families for generations. As Victor and his remaining men departed, Maya felt something shift in her chest. The weight she had been carrying since the reunion, since childhood really, seemed to lift. She had faced her past, faced her fears, faced the most dangerous men in the world. And she had won. But Dominic's next words reminded her that some battles were just beginning. "Maya." His voice was serious, stripped of the relief that had filled it moments ago. "The organization won't accept what happened tonight. Me being captured, being rescued by someone they see as an outsider. There will be questions, challenges." "What are you saying?" He took her hands, his dark eyes intense. "I'm saying that the life I've built, the empire, the power, all of it, it suddenly seems very unimportant. What matters is you. What matters is us." He paused and she saw him struggle with words that didn't come easily. "I want out, Maya. I want to leave this world behind and build something new with you, something clean." Maya stared at him, her heart pounding. "Dominic, you can't just walk away from—" "I can. And I will." His grip tightened on her hands. "But I need you to understand what that means. The council won't let me go easily. There are protocols, traditions. In this life, you don't simply retire." "What are you saying?" His smile was sad and fierce all at once. "I'm saying that the hardest fight is still ahead of us. But I'm also saying that for the first time in my life, I have something worth fighting for beyond power and reputation." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm fighting for you, Maya. For our future, and I don't intend to lose." Outside the warehouse, dawn was beginning to break over New York City. A new day, filled with new dangers and new possibilities. Maya Chun, the outcast, the survivor, the woman who had tamed the most feared man in America, faced the rising sun with her hand in Dominic's. The organization was watching. The council would not be pleased. But for the first time in her life, Maya wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready. The council chamber was located in a building that didn't officially exist, in a part of Manhattan that appeared on no maps. Dominic had brought Maya here once before, shortly after they first met, when he was still trying to scare her away with the reality of his life. She remembered thinking that the room felt like a tomb, all dark wood and heavy silence. Portraits of dead men staring down from the walls. Now, 3 years later, she walked into that same room with her head held high. The 5 council members were already seated at the long table. Old men, mostly, their faces carved by decades of difficult decisions and darker deeds. They had built the Marchetti Empire alongside Dominic's father, and they guarded its traditions with zealous intensity. Dominic. The speaker was Antonio Castellano, the eldest member, his voice like gravel wrapped in silk. "You requested this meeting. Speak." Dominic stood at the head of the table, Maya just behind him. He had dressed carefully for this, his best suit, his most commanding presence. But there was something different about him now. Something lighter, despite the gravity of the moment. "I'm stepping down," he said simply, effective immediately. I'm relinquishing control of all Marchetti operations to the council, pending selection of a successor. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, chaos. Impossible, someone sputtered. The position is hereditary. You can't simply abandon your responsibilities. This is unprecedented. Antonio raised a hand, and the room fell silent. His ancient eyes studied Dominic with an intensity that made Maya's skin prickle. "You know the rules," Antonio said quietly. "No one leaves this life. It's not a career, Dominic. It's a covenant. Your father understood this, his father before him. My father also understood that the covenant means nothing if it destroys the people it's meant to protect." Dominic's voice was steady. "I've given 20 years to this organization. I've built empires, eliminated threats, made us stronger than we've ever been. But I've also realized something that my father never had the chance to learn. And what is that?" Dominic glanced back at Maya, and his expression softened. "That power means nothing without something to protect." "Someone to protect." "I found that someone, and I will not sacrifice her on the altar of tradition." Antonio's gaze shifted to Maya. She felt the weight of his assessment, the calculation behind those ancient eyes. This was a man who had seen everything, survived everything, outlived everyone who had ever challenged him. And now he was looking at her like she was the most dangerous person in the room. "The woman," he said. "The one who saved you from Koslov. We've heard the reports." His lips twitched. It might have been a smile. Impressive for an outsider. "She's not an outsider." Dominic's voice hardened. "She's my wife." Another ripple of shock through the council. Maya stepped forward, standing beside Dominic rather than behind him. "If you want to know why Dominic is leaving," she said, her voice clear and strong, "look at me. I'm the reason. Not because I asked him to. I didn't. But because being with me showed him that there's more to life than this room, these traditions, this endless cycle of power and violence." "Pretty words," Antonio said. "But words don't change centuries of tradition." "No," Maya agreed. "But actions do." "I walked into Viktor Kozlov's trap alone. I saved Dominic when your protocols and your traditions left him helpless. And I ended a war that has been draining this organization's resources for 30 years. She met Antonio's gaze without flinching. "What have your traditions accomplished lately?" For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, incredibly, Antonio laughed. It was a rusty sound like machinery mill that hadn't been used in decades, but it was genuine. "She has fire," he said to Dominic. "I see why you chose her." "I didn't choose her," Dominic replied. "She chose me. Despite knowing exactly what I am, what I've done, she chose me anyway." He reached for Maya's hand, lacing their fingers together. "And I'm choosing her over everything else, over all of this." And Antonio leaned back in his chair, studying them both. The other council members waited in tense silence, clearly uncertain how to proceed. "There is a way," Antonio said finally. "A precedent from before your father's time. A clause written into the original covenant for precisely this situation." Dominic frowned. "I've read every line of that document. There's no exit clause. Not an exit clause." Antonio's eyes glinted. "A transfer clause. If a leader wishes to step down, he may do so by naming a successor and transferring all obligations to that individual. The successor must be of blood or bond, family by birth or family by oath." "Marco," Dominic said immediately. "He's been with me for 15 years. He's more than earned. Marco has already been consulted. He accepts." Antonio rose from his chair, moving with the careful deliberation of advanced age. "There is one final requirement. The departing leader must sever all ties with the organization. No continued involvement, no advisory role, no lingering influence. A clean break. Done. And he must provide insurance that he will never use his knowledge against the organization." Antonio stopped directly in front of Dominic. The insurance is traditionally permanent. Maya felt ice flood her veins. What kind of insurance? Antonio's expression was unreadable. Information. Secrets that would destroy Dominic if released. Proof of his involvement in activities that would guarantee life imprisonment or worse. He turned to Maya. We keep such records on all our leaders. It ensures their silence even in retirement. So you're saying he can't leave, Maya said slowly, but you'll hold his life over his head forever. We're saying that trust must be earned, and sometimes trust requires leverage. Dominic's hand tightened on hers. I'll provide whatever you need. Records, documentation, whatever guarantees your security. But I want your word, all of your words, that Maya is protected, that her family is protected, that this organization never touches our lives again. The council members exchanged glances. Some kind of silent communication passed between them, decades of shared experience condensing into a single moment of decision. Agreed, Antonio said finally. Provide the documentation, name Marco as your successor, and then extended his hand to Dominic. Then you're free. The handshake that followed felt like the end of an era. Maya watched as Dominic released a breath she hadn't realized he'd been holding. The tension in his shoulders loosened. The shadows behind his eyes began to lift. One more thing, Dominic said. The Kozlov files. I want them sent to Victor, as promised, and I want your word that the ceasefire holds. The war with Kozlov was your father's obsession, not ours. We're happy to see it end. Antonio stepped back, and for the first time, he looked almost human, almost kind. Go, Dominic. Build your life with your fierce young wife. Have children who will never know this world. Be happy. His voice softened. Your father would have wanted that, even if he never knew how to say it. Dominic nodded once, sharply. Then he turned to Maya, and she saw it, the moment everything changed. The weight that had pressed on him for 20 years finally lifting. The chains of obligation and duty and inherited violence finally breaking. Let's go home, he said. But Maya knew their old home, the penthouse with its glittering views and security teams, wasn't what he meant. Home was wherever they built their future. Home was whatever came next. Together, they walked out of the council chamber and into the rest of their lives. 6 months later, a small church in the Italian countryside hosted the quietest wedding in Marchetti history. Only a handful of guests attended, Maya's sister, a few trusted friends. Marco standing as best man with tears he would deny until his dying day. Maya wore simple white, no designer labels, no elaborate gown. Dominic wore a suit that cost a fraction of his old wardrobe but fit him better than anything ever had. When they exchanged vows, both of them cried, and neither of them cared who saw. They had bought a house in a village so small it didn't appear on most maps. Stone walls, olive trees, a garden that Maya was slowly teaching Dominic to tend. Their neighbors knew them as the American couple who had retired young, something to do with finance, apparently, though they were refreshingly uninterested in talking about work. One evening, a year after the wedding, a car pulled up to their village house. Maya was in the garden when she heard it, and her heart stuttered with old fear before she recognized the figure stepping out. Antonio Castellano, ancient and immaculate in a summer linen suit. Dominic emerged from the house immediately, positioning himself between Antonio and Maya with instincts that had never quite faded. Relax, Antonio said, raising his hands. I come bearing gifts, not threats. He held out a manila envelope. Dominic took it wearily, opening it to reveal a stack of documents, and then, incredibly, he laughed. What is it? Maya asked, moving to his side. The insurance files. Dominic showed her the documents, photographs, records, evidence of his past, all of them, with a notarized letter stating that the organization has destroyed all copies. Maya looked at Antonio in disbelief. Why? Because Marco has proven to be an excellent successor. Because the organization is thriving without Dominic's direct involvement. And because... Antonio paused, something almost wistful crossing his ancient face. Because I am old, Mrs. Marchetti. And before I die, I wanted to do something that felt like mercy instead of calculation. He turned to go, then stopped. There's something else. Victor Kozlov has reconciled with his family's past. The information you gave him led to the truth about his father's death. His uncle has been dealt with appropriately. Victor asked me to convey his thanks and his promise that the ceasefire will hold long after all of us are gone. Antonio walked back to his car and drove away, leaving Dominic and Maya standing in their garden with the last chains of the past finally broken. That night, they burned the files together, watching the flames consume the evidence of a life that no longer existed. Maya leaned against Dominic's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong against her back. It's really over, she whispered. All of it. Not all of it. Dominic turned her to face him, his dark eyes shining in the firelight. This is just the beginning. Our beginning. Maya kissed him then, deeply and thoroughly, tasting freedom on his lips. She had walked into that high school reunion expecting closure. Instead, she had found the courage to face every demon from her past, the bullies who had tormented her, the criminal empire that had claimed the man she loved, and the fear that had followed her since childhood. The girl who ate lunch in bathroom stalls, the woman who tamed the monster, the wife who chose love over fear every single time. Maya Trone, Maya Marchetti, finally, completely, impossibly free.